thought this was a really important topic for us to engage on. Obviously, what happens in DC is important unto itself, but it also has implications for us nationwide. This is an issue that has been ongoing. We have seen paid leave programs passed in San Francisco. Some states have adopted different paid leave programs, and there have been a growing number of proposals for federal level mandates or paid leave programs. This is a really important issue with important implications for the future. And it's also one in which I think the public often just hears one side of the issue. I know on my Facebook feed, I often see memes or stories that suggest that the United States is a worse place for women to work than Zimbabwe because we lack a paid leave program. And of course, it's a much more complicated issue than that. And the implication is often that there is no other reason than pure misogyny or corporate greed that keeps us from having a sweeping paid leave law. And again, we wanted to make sure that the other side of this issue was heard. There are very real costs to mandates and paid leave programs. And those costs come not just in dollars and cents for taxpayers and businesses, but also in lower wages for workers and lost opportunities, employment opportunities, and opportunities for advancement, particularly for women. And that's why I'm really thrilled we have such a great panel for this discussion. And this is going to be a discussion. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists and pose a question or two to each and encourage them to weigh in with their perspectives. Then in a little bit, I'm going to ask for questions from the audience. We want you guys to be involved in this conversation too and hear what you have to say. I'm going to start with James Dinegar as our first panelist. James is the president and CEO of Greater Washington Board of Trade, which is the leading regional organization representing the business interests for major companies throughout Northern Virginia, the Districts of Columbia, and suburban Maryland. So can you first tell us a little bit about the situation in Washington, D.C., where we stand with this bill, and why this is why you're concerned about it, or what your people's perspective is on this?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here, and happy to give that perspective. So the Greater Washington Board of Trade represents regional business interests. That's the dynamic that's different here than it is in virtually any other spot around the United States. So when I have the XYZ company located here, they employ people from Maryland, Virginia, the District of Columbia. Heck, they may even have offices in those different jurisdictions. If your minimum wage is 7 and change over in Virginia, but it's higher in the district and higher in Maryland, but you're a company that has that across the board, it makes it very difficult within the office. So as that's happened, a lot of the companies have said, well, whatever the district has had, that's going to be the minimum wage around this region. Until that went to $15, and companies were like, well, it's a little expensive for my blood. I can get it for 7 and change over in Virginia. You take that, you look at what happened is the states you hit, California, Rhode Island, New York, and New Jersey have universal paid leave. And all of them have it paid for by the employees. The employees pay. District of Columbia, for whatever reason, came out with an employer paid right at the start for 16 weeks, 1% of your payroll tax. That was the proposal. It's nowhere close to that, nowhere close to 16 weeks. And it wasn't because the business community had lobbied heavily on that. Frankly, we were dumbfounded that they would have started with 16 weeks. There was no way that it penciled out. But no one did the homework ahead of time. And what we called for was we called for a task force to look at this, made up of the proponents and the business community and others in the HR field. No. We said we should do a study. In fact, we'd actually pay a third for that study. We thought it'd be about $300,000. Why don't you get the proponents to pay for a third, and the council or the mayor's office to pay for a third, and the business community? No. No, actually, we've got our mind made up. We don't really need the facts. And here's the issue from the Board of Trade's perspective. Employer paid. There's a company in town that employs 2,000 people. It's the people who work in the District of Columbia, regardless of where you're from. If you work in the District of Columbia, you're covered. Unless you work for the federal government or the DC government. But if you work in the District of Columbia, a private company, you're covered. There's a company that has 2,000 employees in the district. 144 of them live in the District of Columbia. 145 of them live in Virginia, and the rest all live in Maryland. So under this law, they're all covered but the vast majority of the dollars go to residents of Virginia and Maryland, but they're DC tax dollars. And we're the regional business group going, what are you doing? The other is, we've got, I'll just use another example of a pretty good sized bank, not headquartered here, but they have a strong presence region-wide. If you have a child, you adopt a child, you have a foster child, and it's a new addition. 12 weeks, 100% pay, both parents. So that's what they offer, and you can imagine that under the district law, sort of soon-to-be law, it's not been signed yet or vetoed, and we're still waiting to see when it proceeds. It hasn't been sent to the mayor yet. But it's 2 weeks for paid leave when you're sick. It's 6 weeks when your parents are ill and you have to take care of them, or your children are ill and you have to take care of them. And if you have foster, adopted, or newborn, both parents that they're working in the District of Columbia, both parents are covered for up to 8 weeks. Okay, so back to that bank. They provide 12 weeks, 100% of pay. It's not 100% of pay in the District of Columbia. They certainly provide the 6 weeks plus for taking care of your parents or ill children, and more than 2 weeks. So why would you tax them 0.62%? Like they're doing the right thing. Why would they be taxed? And so we pitched every different iteration you could think of. From our perspective, if it were a national program, at least it levels it out. Maryland, Virginia, the district, around the rest of the country. For the bigger companies that are here, they're national in scope. But the challenge is that the proponents came through, and this is a very expensive program at a time when we're concerned for the district. I'm not sure the district is concerned, but if there's a rollback of the Affordable Care Act, it's going to cost the district money. If there are changes in tax policy that affect real estate and other incomes, the hit comes to the district. And here they are spending money that, frankly, if I work for that bank, my last point is, and I'm sick, or my kid's sick, or we have a newborn, the bank already pays me. So why should the district pay me? I don't know why the district should pay you, but the law says they will pay you, so it's bonus money. And 2/3 of that money will be going to non-residents of the District of Columbia. It goes to Maryland and Virginia. And those are the numbers that we crunched. That's the homework we did. That's the research that we did. We hired IHS to do the economic study on it. And we shared that in deaf ears.
Well, that's, it's really interesting to think about I think that, when I was thinking about this issue, I certainly think about it as kind of a business located in one place, but it is interesting to think of just how complicated this gets, and for businesses that are spread around many areas. Before we go any further, I want to try to get we have 2 small business owners with us, and I want to especially thank them for taking time out to be with us today. I know that you guys have so it's tough enough running a small business when you have to get involved in issues like this, but Arianne, I wanted to turn to you. She's the co-founder of the Amsterdam Falafel Shop, and I wanted to talk a little bit about you. If you could share first a little bit about your business and kind of the considerations that you have to go through when you're thinking about hiring issues and things like that before, even before this new law is foisted on you.
Sure. Again, thank you for having us today. We face the same challenges, I think, that all small businesses do, not just in the district, which is the myriad of compounded, add-on, little ancillary items that you get nickel and dimed to death for, and that you're never really aware of when you first go into business. And against that, we face the challenge of keeping our food affordable for people. And so much like you don't want to go in and spend, $20 for a Chick-fil-A, you don't want to come in and spend $20 for a falafel. And so we are trying to provide nutritious and good food for people at a low cost. And when you have your minimum wage rate rising, which we are very much in support of, we've always paid above the minimum wage in the past, and we feel like the minimum wage has begun to catch up to us. And you are providing steady income for people. We don't reduce our employees' hours during the winter when business gets slow, and there's a significant difference between the winter and the summer months because their landlords don't reduce their rent. So we have sort of a compassionate understanding for what it takes to have an employee be a happy employee. And then you look at trying to get them health care. in the district and work with them on that. And you've got all sorts of a million little fees that are piled on you from every direction. And then the changing landscape of fees and credit card processing. There's just a whole bunch of things that people face. And then you throw the healthcare on top, or the family leave on top of it. And what we find is that for us as a small company, we deal with 10 people in our shop, 10 people in one of our other stores. And when someone needs to be out for a family leave situation, we make that accommodation. That's what we do. We don't have a choice, and we pull together as a family because they are like our family, and we take care of them and make sure that they get paid and that their shifts get covered. And we pay the additional people to do the work, or my husband and I come down and help. We do what needs to be done. I think that when you put yet another fee on us, it has two concerns for us. One speaks to what he was speaking of, which is that you may tell us it's 0.67% now, but when you actually find out 2 years from now that you don't have the money to run the program, you're going to come back to our well. You're not necessarily going to go to some other well to get that additional money, and that's important because it's just going to come back to hurt us again in the future. The other is that I think that it sets a precedent where everything is on the business owner. There's no participation by the government in an ongoing way. There's no participation by the employee in an ongoing way. And I feel like this has happened to us as small businesses before. If you look back to the 80s, I know there are a lot of people in this room who can remember when the debit cards first came out. And everyone was excited. Here's a piece of plastic. I don't have to carry a checkbook anymore. People don't have to worry about checks. It's pretty automatic. And everyone can run to the little Most machine. The problem with that is that the fee was put on the businesses. It was something to benefit the banks and benefit the consumer, but the fee was put on the businesses, and that has never changed, and it has never gone away. So 30 years from now, we as small businesses will be sitting in DC talking about how the fees for family leave just keep going up, and nobody will ever make the move, is our fear, to shift some of the responsibility onto the other parties who are sharing in the benefits.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting, you know, and it's funny. One of the hats I wear at the Independent Women's Forum is I help oversee a lot of the budgets. And we're a small organization. We've got about 12 people on staff. And we have to make the same decisions. We're essentially all women and got a lot of babies. You'll see two of the very pregnant people walking around here today, or work for IWF. I've had 5 kids during the time I've been employed at IWF. And it's funny because I think one of the things that troubles me so much about so much of the conversation that kind of revolves around the paid leave debate is this idea that businesses are all being kind of nefarious and cheap, and that you know, if you're not have a whip to them to give paid leave, that they don't want to, and that any pushback is basically based on that. When I know, you know, again, at different times I didn't take off a full 6 weeks after some of my kids because I was able to just start working from home. I had really easy pregnancies. I've worked remotely. And that was fine, but when somebody needs more time off, if somebody has a C-section with complications, then I'm not going to be, you know, get back to work. You know, we do treat each other like a family. And when I look at this, when I was reading the paid leave bill, the DC version, I thought, you know, all these different silos of leave. You know, I don't want to have to keep track of was this a sick day, or was this your kid's sick day, or was this for a baby? You know, it really has such a complicated, and I think it loses that human factor. So anyway, I really appreciate your perspective, and I want to get Scott Hoffman is a 4th generation owner of Howard and Hoffman Insurance, the insurance agency. And Scott, I'd love to hear a little bit about your perspective on, give us a little history on your business, and then you know, being here in DC and some of the challenges that you foresee with this.
Yeah, my great-grandfather started the business back in 1906. So my family has been in DC for over 4 generations, and I've definitely enjoyed being here and gotten a good livelihood out of being here. But I see the continued pressure with all the regulations, because this is just one of the other ones that they just keep adding up on the small businesses. As she was saying, the 6.2% isn't going to last that long. We're pretty sure that that's going to go up. And if it goes up, you're not going to change it. They'll just increase the tax. And one of the things when you don't have, people don't have skin in the game, when they're not part of it, you abuse the benefit. People eat more when food is free. You eat, as opposed to having to pay for it. But also from my perspective as a small business, I do my best. And when one of my employees got pregnant, she was allowed to take the leave that she needed to take, and we wanted her to take. When my brother was white, he had his 2 kids, he worked. Not because he was a man, because he was an owner. And he had no choice, because if he isn't working, if I'm not working, we don't make money. And we can't pay our employees if the 2 owners aren't working. So you pass these benefits, you're gonna be $15 a minimum wage. If I start a small business or running a small business and I don't make money, the government's not gonna come pay me $15 an hour for my year's labor. But I've gotta pay all my employees plus the other benefits. And I think they're making it increasingly difficult to be a small business in the district. The restaurants, I also insure a lot of restaurants, and other small businesses, and I'm afraid there's going to be fewer of them in the district for me to write insurance for.
Sure.
Because they're, especially if you can move, there's no likelihood you will. A friend of mine runs a small association, and he already plans to move out of the district.
Wow.
It's just getting, with the rents and the wages, it's just getting more than they can afford to continue working in the district. Also, as an insurance agency, I am lied to on a regular basis. It's never anybody's fault. Oh, sorry. It's never your fault. It's always somebody else's fault. So, are they going to have adequate backups for the people that want to use it? Because that's one of the things that you're taking away from me. You're taking away the employer's choice. This is a good, solid employee who's been working for me. They have earned this.
Yeah.
So I want to give it to them, as opposed to somebody that just started working and they've been taking a lot of days off and they haven't been a very good worker. They haven't been showing up on time. They haven't been working hard. You're like, I don't want to give you this extra benefit now. I can't afford to give it to you. I also, in my business, I need fairly highly trained employees. I can't go to the street and get somebody and train them in 6 days or weeks. If you haven't been in insurance, probably a year before you're going to start really doing some useful work for me. Again, as a small business, that's much harder to absorb all these costs, because I can't. I get paid on the commission of the premium. I have no say over how much I get paid. I don't get to increase my price. The insurance companies tell me what I get to check, what is charged, and I get a percentage of that. But it's also just the total added burden that they keep piling on and on and on. And if I was starting a new business, I wouldn't start it in DC. I would leave. I doubt there's going to be a new insurance agency anytime soon in DC. A big one may move in their office, a small office, but they're not going to bring a big presence. And I think that's going to be an ongoing problem.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. And Marc Freedman is our final panelist. He's from the Executive Director of Labor Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I was hoping you might be able to talk a little bit about the big picture, because we've been hearing some of how this works for businesses. I know that this bill is the details are still kind of unknown, and there hasn't been a lot of economic analysis. But do you think it's a realistic expectation that there will be businesses leaving, that this will cost the district jobs? What do you see as kind of the big implications for this?
Well, thank you, Carrie, and thank you all for having me. I'm going to ramble through a few sort of random points here for a bit.
Sure.
Actually, the last question you posed to me about whether people are likely to leave the district is the question I just wrote down that I want to hear from our 2 panelists. Arianne's got operations in Virginia and DC. That looks like a pretty distinct choice, and you just mentioned the idea of whether new insurance companies are going to move in the area. But let me step back a little bit and sort of answer maybe a big picture question, which is, why is the big bad U.S. Chamber of Commerce sitting at a table talking about a local DC law? If any of you are familiar with us, we typically stay out of the local debates. We leave that to the local chambers and state chambers for their purposes, because quite frankly, they have different parameters and different pressure points that they need to work through, and it's not for us to tell them how to fight these issues. Well, the answer to that question is sort of twofold. One is, this is one of the rare debates where we actually are an employer, per se. I mean, I work for the chamber. Those of you who are familiar with us know that we've got a very large building over there just across the street from the White House, which I think is probably going to be the answer to why we're not going to relocate. Nobody's really raised the question yet, but you could imagine it being in the air if we weren't such a long-standing presence with such a historic building and all those kind of things. The other reason why I've taken an interest in this issue is that this whole concept started with our friends in the Obama Department of Labor. Some of you may be familiar that Secretary Perez went around the country on his Lead on Leave tour, proselytizing for the idea of mandated paid leave laws and highlighting companies that already provided certain leave benefits and saying, see, look at these great companies, why don't we have this for everybody? And then they found money that was not appropriated by Congress, because there's a line item in the Department of Labor's budget submission for helping localities develop their programs, and it gets zeroed out every year. And so they did not have money specifically appropriated for this purpose, but I guess Secretary Perez scrounged around in his couch or something and found a few bucks and said, here, District of Columbia, here's some money, go forth and hire a consultant to develop a mandated paid leave concept. And as Jim was describing, that's how we got this bill. It did not come out of any collaborative effort. In fact, it didn't even come out of a collaborative effort at the Department of Labor level, and certainly not at the DC Council level. They hired somebody on the outside to help them formulate this plan, and then they introduced it, and the Secretary was part of that introduction process, beaming broadly behind the scenes and saying, see what a great idea we've cooked up here for this laboratory of ideas we call the District of Columbia. So there's a federal overlay to this issue, and I think the Obama administration, and certainly as they hope to have a successor administration of their own thinking, saw this as the opportunity to sort of put a foothold out there to plant the flag and then ramp this up in other places. Notwithstanding Jim's good work, and I've been in meetings with him and trying to figure out how to respond, they've moved forward with this idea. And when Jim says they didn't have any data, he's understating it. They had nothing. I mean, they literally cooked this up out of thin air. They said, how much leave do we want to give people? They pulled this number 16 weeks out of thin air. Where are we going to get the money? Well, we've got all these rich employers here in the district, so let's just go after them. And that's it. I mean, as compared to other jurisdictions where they actually do have the employees pay in, and they have skin in the game, as we heard, that it changes their thinking about how to use that benefit. None of that was present in this concept. So it's a horribly flawed idea, produced out of a horribly flawed process, out of horribly flawed instincts, and so that's where we are. I want to pivot a little bit here, because we've heard a little bit now about some of the national employers that are present in the district, and obviously the chamber works with a lot of big companies and a lot of national employers. And there is growing a sense that this patchwork effect that we're seeing, and we've mentioned some of the other jurisdictions that have their own versions of leave, and now the district's version of leave, this patchwork effect is becoming a really serious problem for employers with national presence. I don't know where this is going to end up, but I can tell you we have members coming to us saying, we've got to figure out some way to get a national concept in place that's going to override these local concepts, because we're getting squeezed, and there is no sweet spot policy they can put in place that will cover them in all these different jurisdictions. So there's a different tenor to the debate right now. For a long time, the chamber, and I was probably the person responsible for having to say this, was all about just say no. And now we're trying to say, well, let's figure out, let's look at this and see if there's something that we can support that would override these local mandates that are causing so much trouble. Where is that sweet spot? How do we get there? What's the mechanism for getting employers to put in place these types of leaves? So I'm just signaling that there's a different debate coming. I'm not in a position to tell you where it's going to go or what the end product's going to be, but don't be surprised when you start to hear this type of thinking being expressed. One more quick point. One of the things that you mentioned, Carrie, about how the United States is always compared to these horrible countries that don't have their own paid leave policies, and I get that routinely when I work in the congressional offices about this issue. That's what we always hear. What that does not capture is the fact that so many employers are providing various levels of paid leave. We certainly heard some descriptions here today. And also, and this is one of the things I've always said, and I'm happy to have it confirmed, there is an awful lot of leave given that's never captured. The impersonal, the informal leave, hey, my kid is just got sent home, I gotta go, get the heck out of here. My wife just had a baby, I gotta stay home, fine, we'll work it out. You guys gave some great examples how you pitched in to help your employees. That happens routinely, and I hear about it from all kinds of sources. It does not get captured. You do not have a policy on your books that says we will jump in whenever our employees need help. But you do it, and it happens. And that's part of the discussion that is never captured in these accounts that says the United States has such a horrible paid leave environment that people aren't getting any leave because we don't have a national policy in place. I just want to throw that out there so people understand how misguided that point is when they hear it, and I'm fairly confident most people in this room understand that, but a few little examples will help point that out. So with that rambling, one more point, sorry.
Sure.
Finally, this is it, I promise. The DC bill is so bad. Don't take Jim's word for it. He's a good guy, and I believe him. Even the Washington Post, if you follow this debate, the Washington Post has editorialized against this bill at every step of the way, making many of the points that Jim has made about how employers who already provide this leave are going to get burned, how this is so out of sync with the DC's finances. There's no way that this is going to, that the tax level is going to support what they're trying to do with it. All those good, solid, good government fiscal policy reasons that Jim cited, the Washington Post, which, as we all know, is not necessarily our friend very often, has said in their editorials, and it fell on deaf ears. This is a very strange debate. It's literally one-sided, and it's going to be very hard to see how we could make a difference here. Thank you. I will not put them out.
No, it's interesting. I do think it's really important to talk a little bit about those statistics. Because it's so aggravating when you hear the point about the lack of paid leave, particularly when you see this. You'll see the statistics, something like only 15% of employees have paid maternity leave. Okay, well, you kind of just know just from your own experience that that's not true. But the truth is that a lot of people don't have from places with small accounting or administrative departments, don't have a bucket of leave that they call maternity leave and have on the books. Instead, they have, the sick leave plus your vacation time, and then if you have a baby, they say, okay, how about an extra 3 weeks? Does that sound okay? Okay, or oh no, you had a C-section, that's great. Or you want to come back part-time? Okay, we'll stretch it out and work these things out. That's why I think it's interesting. The Census Bureau has a really, I think, helpful report that studied on what actually interviewed mothers and said, okay, first-time moms, what happened? What was your leave situation? And it doesn't paint a perfect picture. You'll see that I think it was about 60% of women who had full-time work had paid leave immediately following the birth of their child. But most had a partially paid leave, partially unpaid leave, and were able to stretch it out to 6 to 8 weeks. So anyway, it's a very different. It shows this is what actually happens when they report, or they had some kind of disability that they could use through their employers. So it's a very different picture than this idea that only 1 in 10 women has paid maternity leave. So I don't know if you want to comment on.
I just wanted to bring something up that feeds into what you're talking about also. They're trying to, what we have heard at least, is that DC is trying to be an example. There are a lot of people who are behind this who want DC to be an example for the rest of the country. One of the things that I think is completely cutting off our ability to do that is our home rule situation. And so my understanding is that the reason they can't get employees to pay into this, the reason that they can't get participation from them in the program, and the reason it has to be just on employers is that there's an inability because of home rule to tax that employee in that way.
Okay.
And so when we brought this to their attention, and when it was first brought to our attention, we then came back at that last committee meeting, brought it to their attention again and said, you know, what are you going to do about this? There's nothing they really can do. They've not found a workaround. They've not worked hard to find a workaround. And so I wonder if there are any ideas on the table, and I'm hoping other opportunities for how to handle this sort of thing in a city like ours that is not a model for other states because we're not a state.
Yeah.
And so I just think that it's completely opposed, our reality and our situation is completely opposed to what their goal is in that situation. So it kind of has us starting at a deficit.
Yeah, that's interesting, James.
A couple of observations. I'll pick up on that. Here's the thing about being in the greater Washington region where we're all type A personalities. One of the most common refrains I heard about came from women who are moms who said, oh my God, 16 weeks, I was pulling my hair out after 3, I couldn't wait to go back to work. And they had paid time off. And I'm thinking, all right, we're not normal. So let's look at another Omaha or someplace. But having said that, there were some very important data points that the district just moved right past. So a district employee, District of Columbia government employee, gets 8 weeks paid time off. 8 weeks. And when they looked at this, the first year it was in existence, 2,176 people applied for it. 2,176 people got it, and 2,176 people took every single day of all 8 weeks. And it cost the district $35 million the first year, and they were like, whoa, wait a minute. We didn't budget anything for that. We didn't think that there was going to be a fiscal impact of, sort of a rounding error. And we were like, pay attention, that was the first year. Opportunity to put money out there. It doesn't require businesses to offer 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. It's not, they're not getting into my employee manual. But if I have a child, if my child or my parent is sick, or if I'm sick, then I can get a check from the District of Columbia, whether my employer or gives it or not. Back to that bank, that employer pays 100% of the salary. So you talk about double dipping. Oh, and by the way, it'll be somebody from Maryland or Virginia. They'll double dip. It'll be Christmas around here. At the same time, we did issue a variety of proposals. So to that point of not being a state, the district cannot tax people from other jurisdictions. People cannot tax people. But if they're working in the District of Columbia, they can tax the businesses and then use those funds to pay those people. We said, tell you what, how about you tax businesses 0.25%, just a slice, but then keep our employees out of it. We'll put on the table, charge us 0.25%, a little bit, and we don't want to be in the pool. We don't want to pull our hair out. We don't want to confuse our employees. We want to take care of our employees. And with that 0.25%, go take care of the people who don't have this benefit. It would cost us significantly less business. It would also mean far, 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 far fewer people dipping into it. So if you've got both sides of the ledger, income and expense, understand that there would be far fewer people dipping into this, so you would be more than able to cover the cost with that 0.25%. And again, no time of day was given to it. And so the frustration is, we were never, from the Board of Trade's perspective, we were never opposed to universal leave. But we think that there are significantly better ways to take care of the employees, significantly better ways, smarter ways for the District of Columbia to spend their money and to administer it. And we were rebuffed it. So really had my mind made up, and we're going to proceed full steam ahead. But I want to be clear, the Board of Trade was never opposed. We think it's among our members that this is a very valuable benefit, and we'd love to have everybody in the region have access to this. We think there are far better ways to do it.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. I want to speak to your first point where you talked about the, what if you don't want to take six weeks off? Because, I've spent, my husband's in the Foreign Service, so I've lived for 7 of the last 8 years. I've lived in Europe, and so I've seen kind of the mecca of paid leave and how women react to having 9 months, 6 months, 12 months off paid for by the government. And of course, you'll definitely, though, the benefits are obvious. A lot of women obviously really enjoy their time off after their work and after having a baby and this kind of break from work and not having to worry about money. The benefits are clear. But there's also a big downside. You can see it in the statistics. You can see it in the fact that European women are about half as likely as American women to be professionals or to be managers. I could hear it in conversations where you would talk to somebody that says, well, I'm ready to go back to work. I really wanted to work for this promotion. I was excited about this project, but I've got my 9 months off now. I have to take it. And this feeling that women, and again, even though of course this is gender neutral, of course men are allowed to, but they never anywhere take all the leave, or if they do take leave, they take it to advance their careers elsewhere because women and men, men aren't the ones dealing with a post-birth. They're not able to nurse their babies. There's a totally different, there's research that shows there's no way to get men and women to behave the same after having a baby. And in Europe, I talked to a good friend of mine, was a boss, and she said she was kicking herself. She said, like my secretary she's pregnant again. I shouldn't have hired her. What was I thinking? She's 30-year-old and newly married. This is her 3rd kid. She'll be disappearing for a year, but I'm not allowed to hire a replacement. And this is going to cost the employer, and it's such a headache. And she's not a sexist. She's just a frustrated person who knew somebody was trying to game the system. And of course, people don't want to think that. They want to give women opportunities, but there's a lot of smart people in Europe. There's a lot of smart business people who look at a newly married 30-year-old woman and think, 18 months off. If this woman has 2 babies in the next, do I want to hold a job for her? Do I want to give her a position of responsibility? Heck no. And so you'll see that there's got to be a huge glass ceiling. So a lot of these policies can be the opposite of helping women lean in. And again, I understand the impulse to want to help people have time off, but so much of this cuts off conversations about work from home and things that can allow women to continue both and take care of their kids. And there's so many new options that there's no reason for us to have a one-size-fits-all when we have such a diverse population.
And to your point, it's one thing to have a glass ceiling. It's another thing when you think about the lower level types of work, like my business, right? My industry, it's a struggle for women to get those jobs anyway, because they walk in the door, they're interviewing next to a guy, and the employer's sitting there going, okay, that guy can mop floors, that guy can lift and carry things, can the woman? That is in their minds. That is something they lean towards hiring men. And so now this is yet another thing that weighs against the woman having an opportunity to get that job, because the person is considering, am I going to lose her? Am I not going to have someone who can walk up and down the stairs with 45 pounds in their hands?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I'd be interested to hear people's perspective on some of what this would mean from an administrative and scheduling headache. Because when I was looking at some of this, it looks to me, unless I'm confused, but that people would be allowed to take their leave in like 4-hour chunks or something. That you'd be able to take it in little bits. And it seemed like I was looking at this and thought, I work for a think tank, and somebody disappears for half a day, it's not the end of the world, but at a place like yours,
right,
you need boots on the ground.
Right, so it's one thing if you're in an office and you can spread the work around between other people and it's not as noticeable, or someone can spend a couple more hours on it. In a situation like ours, we need an actual physical body there. I cannot, Beatrice cannot leave the kitchen and go away for 8 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it is, and us still have food. That just doesn't happen. The guys who ring the registers don't know how to make falafel. It is not a cross-trained job. And so these are critical positions. It's like having your brain surgeon out, but in our case it's the food maker, right? And so when that happens, you have to bring someone else in temporarily, and you have to tell them this is a temporary job while someone is out on leave, and you have to train them to do that. And the person who's left on leave isn't there to train them anymore, because sometimes there's no notice.
Yeah.
So that's a huge component of it. And I think that if you're not even facing that, let's say you have someone else with the same set of skills within your organization, you're now paying them time and a half to work on top of the 40 they were already working to try and fill in for the person whom you're paying.
Yeah.
So it really just becomes a compounded issue, I think, when you're dealing in businesses like ours.
Sure. Good wait first.
Yeah.
James.
What you just mentioned is referred to as the unscheduled intermittent leave
Yeah.
problem. And it's out there already. It doesn't require this district law to become a problem. It's part of the FMLA. And those of you familiar with it, the FMLA is unpaid 12 weeks of protected leave. And I've been running around doing a lot of work on the FMLA over the last several years, and that unscheduled intermittent leave problem is an unbelievable problem for employers. And I've got scenarios, things like school bus drivers who call in the morning of, and you got kids sitting out at school bus stops in bad weather and all kinds of crazy stuff going on there. The most sort of notorious use of unscheduled intermittent leave occurs the day after the Super Bowl. You're chuckling, it's coming up, watch for it. The Monday after the Super Bowl, there may even be stories about this, how everybody who's got an FMLA illness on record all of a sudden has a flare-up. The other one that shows up is the first day of hunting season, deer hunting season, in some of the states that follow that religion. So you get this, and employers in the FMLA world, you have the family leave and the medical leave side, and for the most part, employers understand the family leave thing and they can plan for it. Generally speaking, babies are sort of on a schedule. Even if you're adopting, there's a schedule, so you sort of know when things are going to happen. And they build in their plans. Say, okay, we know someone's going to be out. We got to fill them in, and we'll find the extra work. It's that unscheduled short-term leave that just throws them into a tizzy. I've actually heard of one auto company who maintains a shift of workers available for those short-term uses because they can't have the line go down, but the people are going to call in and use that FMLA leave. So, point is, that problem exists already. It's well documented. The DC law, it just makes it worse because the FMLA law was made unpaid specifically as an incentive for employees not to use this leave inappropriately. That has not held up. Now you're putting paid leave on the table. You're literally throwing gasoline on that fire, and you can expect and predict that employees will use this leave in ways that, let's just say, are inconsistent with the way the bill was sold.
Yeah, James.
And I want to be careful on what the intent is versus how it rolls out in practice. Look, if you have chemotherapy, it's a few hours per day every week, and that's intermittent. And if that's part of what needs to be covered, it should be covered. And I'm not going to go down the list of different intermittents, but there are a lot of companies around here, and certainly in the tech space, but growing here, that they give you unlimited leave. And you know what happens? Aside from the fact that I'm currently working 5 jobs, I'm just on unbelievable leave for all of them because it's unlimited. I mean, I thought through, it was like, how do you get unlimited leave? You get unlimited leave because we're type A personalities. Because I know you're watching me. And I don't mean watching me like Big Brother. I mean, I've got a job to do. I've got deliverables. And I've got metrics. And if I can't keep up, this is a competitive environment around here. So while I might have unlimited leave, sick leave, vacation leave, it's unlimited. If I'm gone for 6 weeks, somebody's going, how valuable is he that I can afford to have him gone for 6 weeks? So I'm not gaming the system. I'm working, and then when I break my leg or when I have the flu and when I shouldn't be in the office so I'm contagious, yep, got it. That's nice on the business side where that can be afforded to do it and when you've got the employee base. But there are lots of other circumstances. It's the one-size-fits-all that Mark hits at. The one-size-fits-all, it's like, keep the government out of my office. In the District of Columbia, they want to have scheduling legislation. Scheduling legislation, that if you change my schedule, I'm not talking about the 40-hour work week, I'm talking about the shift worker. I'm talking about the fact that, well, I'm supposed to work Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in these hours, and if the employer changes that, and we don't give enough notice to the employee, we have to pay them time and a half, or double time. It hasn't been figured out yet. There's actually an app that's prohibited in certain jurisdictions, an app that says it's shift worker, that I can have my conversation on the app with Mark and say, can you take my shift? And yeah, I'll trade you Thursday. And there's an app for it. But it's being prohibited by certain governments in terms of compliance with the shift laws because they want that ability to get the extra pay. They want the ability to tell the employers that they can't do that. And you're thinking, you know, sometimes the employees come to me and say, I've got to take off Tuesday instead of Wednesday. Can I do that? Yep, sure, happy to do that, says the person at Safeway or Giant or elsewhere. Because to your earliest point, these aren't cows. These are employees. And in many respects, they're family, an extension of family. They are colleagues. They're not working stiffs out in the field. And that's the image that is impossible to overcome when you're looking at some of the proposals that come out there and some of the way the businesses are painted. But I have to tell you, I'm very proud of representing the business community. I'm proud of what they do for the community. I'm proud of what they do for their employees. And it is off-putting to be treated the way we get treated.
Yeah, you know, I really appreciate that, and it's funny because I always feel like it's almost an awkward conversation to have when you try to say something nice about employers because you know, it sounds like you're defending the evil guy in the cartoons or the cartoon version of how everyone is depicted in the media. But it's important, I think, to have this balanced picture of course, there are some bad bosses out there, and we know there are, and that's why we have laws in the books to try to protect employees' rights. But there's also employees who abuse the system. And it was also when you were speaking earlier about, Scott, about the you not wanting to give this benefit to the worker who doesn't deserve it. I mean, I would not only worry about that, but I worry about the implications for employee termination. Looking at that district law again, the proposal that is, it's you know, obviously this is you're protected from retaliation. But this is such a sweeping amount of time. It seems like this would be another potential for anybody who you try to let go who has requested this leave. It becomes actionable in terms of litigation, and as an employer, that's scary. It's another reason why I know I would try to not hire as many people, or keep your employees more high end, and you not take risks. So I think that it's important, you know, when you hear this, to realize that
Mm-hmm.
ends up being the opposite of compassionate. You're going to be much less likely to take a chance on somebody, hire that extra worker, hire somebody with, you know, with something difficult in their background. You know, once we have these things, it can cause such a headache for businesses. Would you guys have anything that we want to add before we start bringing in the audience to see if anybody has any questions?
I
Sure.
just want to ask Arianne, tell me how you're working out the Clarendon versus DC discussion.
We closed Clarendon.
Oh, that's how I heard.
For an entirely different reason. We closed Clarendon actually about a month ago, and because there's not as much business out there. So here's the rub for people like us. Do we locate in the district where there's more business and we hope to be in the footfall and the foot traffic flow of things, and we face the competition of the other single food item, novel, wonderful, delicious concepts that are coming up, and there are many? Or do we try and stake out for areas in the suburbs and have a lower commitment to what we're doing financially so that we can take a smaller foot traffic like that? For our franchisees, because we now franchise, they're making the choices about whether to be in DC or be in Maryland. And we've just had a franchisee come to us and say, do you mind if I shift my territory from Northwest DC to Bethesda Rockville? And we said, of course not. We completely understand the challenges that you're facing. You know, that area of Northwest has a lower foot traffic pattern than, say, down in Chinatown. We understand that they'll find a better, you know, sort of environment for themselves to be able to do business and get the right profit model for themselves. And by the way, restaurants don't make a lot of profit. You know, restaurants are notoriously one of these things that you do because you like the business. You want to be in hospitality. When you own 8 or 9 or 10 restaurants, then you're in it for profit, right? But when you're not, it's really about a lifestyle. So I think that within our own group, people are making choices to be elsewhere. And within our DC businesses, we're trying to figure out, how do we share employees? How do we set up a right, which is another whole sticky wick of nuttiness. How do we come to, in franchising, you don't tell people what pricing to set, but how do we come to a pricing for our falafel that allows us to make all the payments we need to pay to everybody and still be able to make it worth having the business? And at the same time that all of this is going on, as businesses, we face the rising costs of gas, the rising costs of transportation, because it's really funny. Gas went up and everybody put a fuel charge on everything, and then gas went down and nobody took the fuel charge off. So like I said, none of these things get rolled back. And so I think that it's a real comprehensive puzzle project for us, and we don't always have the answers on this. And it's super frustrating to try and figure it out when you're just trying to run the businesses.
I think there's a striking comment to say that Bethesda in the People's Republic of Montgomery County is a more enticing business if I would think.
Isn't it crazy? Partially because we don't serve alcohol, but I think
Right.
yes.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, please.
Another facet, there's no mic, I guess.
Sure.
Another facet to this problem is retirees living in the District of Columbia in a myriad of condos and co-ops. We've already lived in the West End here. We've already been advised that if this legislation goes through as proposed, that our condo fees will go up considerably because we have a big staff, because we have grass and we have other things that some city apartments do not have. So,
Oh, that's interesting.
And that's not being addressed at all, to my knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's a really interesting comment.
Let me add a couple points. I'm a small employer in DC. First, having a baby, not that many. What struck me in the law, can you explain? It's about family leave. You had said for parents. What I'd read was anyone in the family, you get months off to take care of someone in the family. Well, that could be repeating every year. You'd have that. Was a baby, you manage, it's occasional. So can you address that issue? That's one point. Secondly, small employers with 5 or 6 employees, everyone's vital. Are they subject to the same law? Thirdly, the city council, this law was proposed, I think, by the guy representing Cleveland Park, who's been there a long time, who introduced it.
Okay.
They have also put forth in this housing committee a proposed law to eliminate any rent increases in the DC, except for the cost of living, would be less than 1%, to stop the renovation of old buildings, to stop any increase on turnover for landlords. The big thing is you've got an increase on turnover is how you finance a lot. To stop all that. That law is pending as well, and it seems you need to make some alliances with the rest of the business community, that the city council suddenly has become the loony left, if you will, on these things. And you know, the long-term consequences, San Francisco, New York, you drive out everybody in the middle class, you only have the rich and poor. But it seems you need to is there some alliance going on with other people in business for some of these? If they pass these 2 laws, there'll be others coming.
Yeah. Does anyone want to speak to kind of the DC, overall DC government climate? Would you think that there's been gotten crazier and crazier, or?
Yeah, I think they have, and that's the thing. It's the combination of everything. The increased minimum wage. You're going to try to tell me how to schedule my employees. You're telling me what time they have to get off. It's just adding to your expenses, and eventually you're just like, I can't be here. I can't make money because I don't compete against just DC insurance agents. I can compete against Geico. I compete against the biggest companies, all over the United States.
Yeah.
So you're not just competing in the one area. And, you know, if condo fees are gonna go up, what are they gonna, they're gonna be working to try to get their insurance down, and then they're not gonna maintain the buildings, and you've got an ongoing problem.
Yeah.
Well, and so I'm just gonna pick up on that. One of the biggest employers in the District of Columbia is Pepco. Pepco's not gonna pay for this. It's a ratepayer, just a pass-through. I mean, it's a Public Utilities Commission. I mean, it's a given. Their expense went up because of a law in the district. Have a nice day. Washington Gas, Verizon, start looking at it. And so, so that's just a pass-through that we'll all eat. The issue continues to be, the council says, you say this is gonna drive businesses out of the District of Columbia. We don't see it. It's like, well, you know something? They don't tell you when they leave. They just leave. They just leave. And I know that the office space vacancy is very tight right now in the Washington DC proper area, but that's not necessarily an answer back to them that says we're doing better than potentially Fairfax or other places. The fact of the matter is that this is squeezing down profit margins. If they're looking to get people employed, we have to fix the illiteracy rate in the District of Columbia. We've got to be able to make more people ready to do the work that we need. The critical issue in the greater Washington region is not the unemployment number. It's the inability to recruit and retain the people we need to fill the jobs. And we're providing benefits and competitive pay. And good Lord, you move here from Oklahoma, and it's a pretty expensive move. But you're getting paid money here that you're not getting paid back in Oklahoma. And so the business market does seek its level. And there are outliers on both sides, unlimited leave versus people who don't provide any. Go after the ones that you're trying to fix, but this whole one-size-fits-all approach is misguided, and they don't seem to be able to help themselves. To your question about the alliances or getting together across the business community, you know, this issue galvanized the business community to get together, and the Board of Trade, and the Chambers of Commerce, and AOBA for apartment and office buildings, and DCBIA for buildings, and a whole slew of others. And there really is a growing concern associated with this is not the end, this is just the latest.
Yep.
Yeah. And to answer your question, it is small businesses, it's on any size business, right, that this leave
Right.
applies. And there's a bucket that I think there's both a bucket for, specifically for kids, and then there's a bucket for family leave as well. And you're right that those can be reoccurring, and I think the expectation is up to 16 weeks each year. So,
Carrie.
And I want to just throw transportation and add that into what you were talking about, because, you know, when you're really looking at the things that affect employees' lives, the family leave is not what affects my employees as much as not being able to get home after midnight on the Metro.
sure.
Okay, and when Metro has to pay for their payroll, their 0.62%, you think that they're gonna do that just by raising the money and somehow finding those hours back again so our employees can get back and forth to work? They're not going to. And when our employees can't get back and forth to work and we have to close earlier because of that, or we have to make choices about staffing and people are no longer able to get in to patronize us, it creates a cycle. And this is exactly what's happening with what you're talking about. If the cost gets passed along to the Pepco consumer, you think about that as you guys at home. That's my electric bill too. So my electric bill goes from $1,400 to $2,000. Okay, that's a lot of change in how much I need to charge you for a falafel, plus the gas bill, plus the water bill, plus everything else that goes with it. So this creates a cycle that ends up discouraging business growth instead of encouraging it.
Yeah, just one quick point. You know, Jim talks about how the DC Council doesn't see the impact on jobs leaving. Well, one of the things I've always said, and this applies in the minimum wage debate probably even more, you can't capture the job not created. So Arianne is sitting there thinking, well, you know, I got a lot of business coming in the door. Can I afford to hire another person? She does the math. Ooh, I don't think so. That's a job that wasn't created because of the impact of these policies that will never show up in any statistical study. That's how these things work. Jim says, well, they just leave. They do. They will just leave. And you may or may not see that departure. But the thing you'll never see is the job that was never created.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, sure.
Jim, this kind of goes off of your point about the one-size-fits-all kind of workplace. I can assure all of us in here aren't mandated to fit into a size 7 shoe, and we probably all want different things out of the workplace. personally, what I preferred as in the workplace as a younger woman was higher pay. I would work really hard, working up the ladder. I wasn't really interested in time off. I wasn't thinking about a baby. Now I'm in my mid to late 30s, and I'm willing to take those trade-offs and to have time off after a kid or more flexible work arrangements for lower pay. So my question is, how is this going to interfere with direct employee-employer negotiations and customized compensation packages?
So nothing that the district is requiring will affect my employee manual. They don't come in and tell me how many weeks I have to provide for paid time off. I do that. But when a qualifying event happens in your life, you then have the opportunity to go down to the District of Columbia and say, I just had a kid, and I'm going to take X number of weeks off. My employer is going to pay me for 4, but I'd like to take the full 8. The district will pay you from the start for those 8 weeks at a percentage, not 100% of your pay, but a reduced percentage. The day you're ill and you call in sick and you take that day off, whether you're paid by your employer or not, the district is a place to go and get a check. So they don't approve your sick leave. They don't approve the timing of your child. They don't approve going out to Kansas and taking care of your parent. They pay you for it. Now, the paperwork, and I'm simplifying it, but the paperwork, believe me, the district is going to expect more than a doctor's note, and I'm sure the HR is going to be involved, and so there will be an administrative burden to the employer, but they don't come in from the district. I mean, FMLA is already in existence, so there is a floor, but there's nothing that the district can require, and they certainly can't require employers out in Maryland and Virginia who have people who work in the District of Columbia to do anything. So I want to be clear on those rules and regulations. They don't get into the employee manual. They do provide a check on these qualifying events.
But my impression was that it would prevent you from, quote, retaliating. So you could take as a small employer, you then have to allow people to be out for the 16 weeks.
No, see, here's the thing that the district is naive about.
Okay.
If I provide 4 weeks off to go take care of your sick parent, and they say, well, we're going to pay you for 6, you take off 6, but actually you're only allowed under the employee manual 4. You're only allowed 4. I don't care if the district's paying you or not. Now, there are plenty of offices that say it's 4 weeks of paid.
Okay.
Now, I'm not paying you, but if you need to take time off to take care of your sick adult beyond that, we're only in for 4, but you can take the time.
Okay.
And so I don't expect there to be that much friction in terms of the gap. There'll be a few, but I think those are the people that there's been friction on other issues. But I would certainly hope and expect that the businesses that can now afford 4 weeks off, but the district's going to pay for 6, that part should be, go get your funds from the district. The goofy thing is, if I'm paying you for 4, why would the district pay you for 6? Why wouldn't they just pay you for the 2 gap?
Right.
And save some of their money?
Yeah,
But
you would
that's
think.
not how the law is written, and
Yeah.
we pitched it, and believe me, my members and their employees are going to be lining up whether they're from Maryland, Virginia, or the district.
Plus, might I not choose, and I'm not saying I would do this, but might I not choose as an employer to say that from now on, when I hire people, we know that DC pays for 8, so we're just not going to pay for leave.
Absolutely.
We're
Yeah.
not going to pay for it. So now I'm going to do less for my employees than I was going to do before, and they're going to wait God knows how long to get that check, whereas they would have gotten it with their regular payroll along with everybody else. They could pay their rent that month.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see as a small employer that this would end up being, that you would look at this as an opportunity to outsource benefits.
For the bigger employers, they don't feel that
Probably.
way.
Sure.
They're not happy about this. 0.62 is not going to break the bank for a lot of those businesses.
Sure.
Mid-sized and smaller businesses, yep, you've got a ready-made program that's now stood up, so I'll cancel mine and move on.
Yeah, good luck.
That's going to be unfortunate.
Yeah, please.
Hi, I was wondering if we could talk about political tea leaves. Will Bowser veto? Will she not veto? If she vetoes, will it be overridden? When does she have to veto or not? If it goes into law, will Congress try to become obtrusive like they sometimes do, which I hate, but in this case, I would actually probably like it. Could you comment on all those things, please?
Anybody have an insight into how?
Yes, I could, and no, I won't. There's a playbook that we have, and I'm not in the business
How
of
can we
sharing.
help?
We'd be happy to put the word out on the help when the time comes. But yes, you have to explore all of the different options. All of the different options. But we're also realists, so you've got to be able to count the votes. And it's not finished yet, but our concern is, without a national piece of legislation that makes Virginia, Maryland, and the district all the same as what's going on around the rest of the country, this is not a one-size-fits-all for the region. It's one size fits 1/3, and then you've got Maryland coming up with their proposal, and Montgomery County on top of Maryland looking at their proposal. That's the patchwork that is not, it's not conducive to good business. But as it relates to the veto or Congress or the implementation of this, there's enough left to be written that we're going to be working on.
I've started 3 companies, helped launch a national bank, and started probably a half dozen NGOs, never located a single one in DC, and that's why. And in fact, I helped found National Women's History Museum. We've kept our administrative offices out of the district until we get our site in DC for the same reason. A couple things. One, do you all have a compendium of testimony from small business owners of the negative impact that can and should be circulated? Number 2, it's been decades since a study was done on how the media treats business, and I'm speaking to the overall atmosphere. A Media Institute did a study showing that businessmen were always portrayed as crooks, con men, and clowns in the media. And I think it's time, and things like this remind me, it's time for us to fight back. Just as Gina Davis did in getting balance for female characters in the media, we need business to step up and really try to work with those who are affecting our culture to get that culture change made. Because you're going to continue to have idiots like we have on the city council who really don't see business as a partner. They see that there's somebody that should be pushed around because they're evil. We've got to change the culture to stop stuff like this in the future.
Thank you. That's an interesting point. Actually.
I have a couple of purely mechanical questions. Are government employees, DC and federal and the World Bank and everyone else exempt from this? Does it not apply to them? Also, does it apply to people who are self-employed? Can self-employed people in DC under the law, will they be able to claim that DC should pay them to take leave because they had a baby or someone died? And then the second set of questions, if I can remember what I was going to ask, I think I've lost my other. Yeah, I have. I forgot my other question. Sorry.
Yeah, the federal government employees in the District of who work in the District of Columbia are exempt from this. DC government employees are already covered under the DC law. The DC government took care of themselves a couple of years ago. I don't remember where it stands right now with self-employed, because there were earlier iterations that had them in and paying the 1% of their own salary. But I don't know what the status is on the
I believe you're in. I think
on the
It's opt-in.
self-employed has the coverage
Opt-in.
already. But
My other
opt-in-
question was actually DC residents who work in Virginia or Maryland. They're not covered?
DC residents who work in Virginia and Maryland are not covered under this.
But that was a change, wasn't
There are specific aspects of the bill that seem to be aimed at low and moderate income workers in DC, and I'm wondering if you can speak to that and how companies that in particular employ people who tend to work minimum wage. I know that, Arianne, you can speak to this a bit more.
Can you take, what are you thinking of? What's the specific aspect that is just targeted to low and moderate income?
Well, I guess you're given a higher percentage of your income up to a certain cap. I think it's about $46,000.
90%.
90% up to that, and then I think it's 50% afterwards, and so it's clearly you get more money. It's sort of making it easier for progressive. Yeah, exactly. If you can talk a little bit more about the maybe some potential income inequality this is meant to rectify?
Sure. I think that there's a basic recognition and understanding in our business, at least in my area of the business, that it's very hard to live on what lower income workers make. And so as a small business, we try to do lots of things to offset that, but it's still not the dollars that go home and into the bank account that pay the rent. So I think that there's a legitimate feeling that if you're making $200,000 a year, you can probably get your rent covered on 60% of your salary. Whereas if you're making $12.50 an hour, you probably can't, and it could end up making you homeless. And so I think that, when people go into this sort of thing and making a project like this, we've heard about the origins of it and why it happened. There are a lot of really well-intentioned, good-meaning people who also jumped on that bandwagon. We saw the people with the babies and the harnesses, and a lot of them weren't from DC, and a lot of it was brought out to sort of push through people's agenda. But there really are a lot of people to whom a program like this could mean a lot. The problem we had with it, and it was very disappointing to us, we had people write to us and social media with us that they were going to boycott us for even in any way being against this Family Leave Act. But to us, if you have a really well-intentioned program and you've executed it badly, and it hurts a lot of the people you intended to help, and it's not self-sustaining, which is something we think about in food but don't always think about in taxes, I think that you put us back. If it creates a harder environment for women in the workplace to get jobs, if it creates a fear in the employee's mind that they can't make ends meet, so they start looking for a way to cut corners, and that could impact, like you said, the uncreated job. We just had this week. Someone asked us to cater an event for the inauguration. It's not a partisan event, so we're down with it, we'll do it. But we had to really look at it critically and think, for the budget that they want to pay, for the food value that they perceive that they're getting, can we afford to bring an additional employee in to help us deliver the food? Right? This is a choice we make every day, not a choice we make once a year when we think about budgets. And so our landscape changes all the time. And a job will come in or a job won't come in, or things will get really slow. You're used to making $4,000 one night in your shop, and you make $350 that night because the weather changed. Your landscape as a small business changes much more drastically, much more quickly, and much more severely than I think it does for some larger businesses. And so, to your point, there have to be accommodations that are made, and I'm glad when people put forth good suggestions to make it a better bill. I just want us to make sure that we don't make it a bad bill.
And I think it's that's an important point. And I think that that it's certainly a welcome idea. I think that everybody who thinks about this issue recognizes that there is some real need out there. When you hear about a low-income worker who doesn't have paid leave benefits, who's scraping by, and then all of a sudden, oh no, she's, it's instead of being an easy birth, it's going to be a C-section. Can she make her rent? I think everybody thinks, oh my gosh, we need that. We can't let that happen. That's crazy, and we need to think about it. And that's what we've at the Independent Women's Forum we've been talking about. How can we target find target ways to help people? We have there's programs already out there, the EITC, that are trying to boost the incomes of people with lower incomes but who have long income histories. But I think the thing that's frustrating so often is that when we talk about that worker, it seems that the people who are for these programs and for this mandate never consider destroying that job, making it so that woman never has the job in the first place. And if you make it too expensive to employ that woman who is low skilled, who's working at a minimum wage or a low income job, the problem is that she's not going to have a job in the first place. And so we really have to balance this out. And I very much hope we can find a way to target aid, but without the job destroying. And we need to make sure that we recognize that for every benefit you give, there's a cost, and that cost comes from somewhere, and it's often the people who didn't want to have to pay it. So please.
But it's also the beginning of hiring somebody. Aren't you going to want somebody now a little more experienced?
Absolutely.
Somebody who's actually worked in a restaurant.
Yeah.
I hired somebody just recently, And it's like, if you didn't have experience, I wasn't gonna hire you. I don't need somebody that went to Harvard. If you have a good, solid high school education, you could work in insurance. But if you just started, it's gonna take a couple years. It's like, I can't afford to hire that person, spend 2 or 3 years training them, when I've gotta pay them all these other benefits along the way, when they're not profitable to me for several years.
We've lost that apprenticeship period where
Right.
people learn their job, and I think that's, we've talked about this a lot in the restaurant industry. Somebody comes in to work for you, and you're gonna be paying them $15 an hour minimum wage to wash dishes, right? That's where they're gonna start.
Yeah.
There's no training period, there's no period in which so I can get a guy who's washed dishes for 15 years and is really, really good at it and is gonna walk in there and wash dishes like a madman and save me some time, or I can hire the guy who's never washed a dish and I have to teach him, it's gonna take forever, and we're gonna go back to school like 15 times the next 2 months to do it. You know, and that's what we call back to training, back to school in our thing. So you think about all these things, and the worst thing we want is for there to be something else for us to consider that could be a negative for that employee. We don't want that. We want to be open to hiring people without experience. We want to be an entry-level job for people.
Absolutely.
Let me just hit on the question of the people earning $46,000 and less, which is, it's not really sort of the definition of livable wage, but it is a lower income and 90% replenishment. When the CFO did his numbers, the higher your replenishment, the more likely you are to take the full use of the time. At 16 weeks, our heads were exploding. We're like, oh, holy smokes, I can't have this technician gone for 16 weeks. I can't have this person gone for the critical, but because you don't typically have a bench. Having said that, at 90% of pay, if you're pulling in $30,000 because you have an illness, because you need to take a week or 2 weeks off or 3 days off, that really wasn't our opposition. Why are you charging the businesses for this when in every other jurisdiction around the country, the employee pays into this pool? And so it was sort of the worst of all of the different examples were taken repeatedly, and they dismissed anything that was on the business side of the ledger of how it would be done. So our concern on those $30,000 and $40,000 a year employees isn't that they're going to take some time off, but they're incentivized at 90% to take every available hour off. And in most of the short-term disability plans that businesses provide, it's typically in the 60% range. And so there's a balance that needs to be hit, but without ever sitting down with the proponents and the opponents and maybe the referee of the government, none of that ever happened. They had their mind made up again.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's really interesting. I feel like when we talk about these like low-wage jobs also, it is this idea of apprenticeship and that you're getting so much more than the money. I know that that one of the undercovered secrets on the minimum wage is just what a small share of people, you know, the picture's always painted as if people are going to spend their entire life working at minimum wage, where that is very much the outlier. More than 50% of minimum wage workers have a pay raise before the end of year one. They're making more. And that's from the national, so if you're maybe at a $15 wage, you're going to be stuck there for longer and not move up as quickly. But getting that experience, showing that you can adhere to a schedule. You know, I think my father-in-law, my husband's from Arkansas, he ran a small pharmacy and general store, and he joked that looking at the small town that if he was he would give a job to all the kids who were the dropout, and you know, oh, it was somebody from my church, so I decided our kid was in juvie and he was coming out, so okay, you can sweep my floors, let's see if he shows up. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes he was able to turn his life around, oftentimes it didn't. But he was willing to take a risk because he wanted to help that family, but he was paying probably $5 or something, you know, a really bad minimum wage, but he was giving that kid a chance. You're not going to give him a chance at 15 or the equivalent of $20 if you have to pay full benefits. It's, you know, again, we see this as youth unemployment skyrockets in urban areas with black unemployment often at, 25% in some cities with high minimum wage now. That's a problem that isn't just for them for a year of missing out salary. That's missing out on your foot in the door to a lifetime of work. So that's, you know, it bothers me that I feel like so often everybody at this table and people who bring up these conversations we're tarred as being uncompassionate. But I think ignoring these things is what's really uncompassionate. Do we have any other comments?
I just want to ask one question. I want to know where this issue is going to go. Mark mentioned that it would probably go national, that we might have some kind of national legislation. That would be fraught with peril too. So where's it going to go? It's obviously going to be very bad for the district employment.
So where is the district thing gonna go, or where's the big debate gonna go?
Is this going to be national legislation? Is Congress going to say we need to deal with this?
We're a long way from seeing something get done in Congress that's going to put in place a national policy. My point was just to emphasize that there are a lot of big companies around the country for whom these patchwork mandates are becoming increasingly difficult to work with, and that the pressure is building. I honestly can't tell you where that's going to go, what the end product is going to look like, or how it's going to get done, or how, who's going to sign off on it. It will be an ugly, messy debate. I fear that once we open it up, we're going to lose control of it. And let's be clear, I'm not sitting here saying the Chamber of Commerce is now comfortable with mandates. We're not trying to say that at all. We're trying to figure out how to talk about something that we can support that's responsive to our companies who are getting chewed up by these individual mandates, and responds to what we would all acknowledge is a need for people to have leave. And that's, those are the big variables we're trying to figure out how they fit into an equation. So it's a rambling non-answer, but that's what I have for you.
Here we go. One more question, and we'll wrap it up.
I have a question specifically about the DC bill. One of the things you hear from proponents is that a lot of small and medium-sized businesses like the idea because they want to provide paid leave, and it's cheaper for them to pay the payroll tax than provide paid leave themselves. And that way they could also compete for workers with larger businesses that already provide paid leave. I wonder if you could speak to how much truth is in that, if that is fairly frequent or not.
I could talk about the cost side of things, and not as much on what happens if I've got 3 people in my shop and one of them is now out for 5 weeks. The cost, actually works out pretty well. The bigger businesses are paying it for the benefit of the smaller businesses to offer this. That's not how it's done in California. That's not how it's done in New Jersey or New York or in Connecticut. So our issue is, why did we take a left turn in the District of Columbia and start to do this where it was a tax on the employers, many of whom are already providing far better benefits that are being proposed, far better. So why? And the number that came back, or the answer that came back was, well, because you can't tax people in Maryland and Virginia. I'm showing you a way that says, leave us out. We're already covering lots of the employees. We'll actually put a little bit of money into the pool and then use that pool to take care of the people who are in need. But they've set up this entire bureaucracy. It's very expensive, $250 million per year program. And for what? Like the issue is, I need to do this. So let's do all of this just to make sure we've got this covered. It's a very inefficient and not an intelligent approach. But if I'm a smaller business, instead of a short-term disability plan that all those other jurisdictions had in place, by the way, that was the base. They all had an insurance plan in place in those jurisdictions, so this was layered on top of that by the employee paying into it. District should have started with that. They should have started with a short-term disability plan in place for the people who work in the District of Columbia. And they didn't. They went from 0 to 100 right away. So our issue is not as much the benefit side of things of people being able to take this time. It's actually pretty reasonable on the lower end of 2 weeks, 6 weeks, and 8 weeks. Okay, pretty much got that and then some. And it's not the level of pay. 90% is for the 46 and less, so it then scales down dramatically beyond that. It's who's paying into this. Like, why would we pay if we're already doing the right thing? You should have gone after a much more targeted approach.
And the marginal difference issue too, that you talked about.
Well, but I don't see it as a big as benefit, because now she's got the same benefit I had, and I'm not giving it. The government's giving it. So I get, what praise am I going to get for this benefit?
What's your competitive advantage?
0. I have no competitive advantage. Yeah, I mean, my employees, my average, I don't have a lot of employees, but we had 2 employees retire with one was over 50 years, one was over 20 years, the other 2 employees, one's 30 years, one's 25 years, and I have 1 of 2 years. I think I'm treating my employees pretty good. They like to work for me because they know when those things happen, when their child is sick, it's like, go home. My brother's gonna do the same thing. His kid's sick, he's going home. I give the same benefit to my employees.
I think you also have to look at who the small businesses are who are saying that they're in favor of it. I would venture to guess, having talked to a lot of small businesses about this, that the ones I've experienced who are really in favor of it are the ones who've been in business fewer than 4 or 5 years. And the ones who have been in business longer than 4 or 5 years have seen their employees have these sort of things happen and have weighed the costs that we pay out of pocket when that thing happens against the cost of paying over the 12 years I've been open and not having used it year after year after year after year. I've had 1 pregnancy in 12 years. So I'd be paying in every year to have taken care of that 1 person who I would have taken care of anyway. And so I think that's what the older business people who are around, who run small businesses over a long period of time are looking at that cost analysis a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I think one of the big takeaways from this is just how diverse business is and how diverse employee situations are. And when we think about, if we recognize there is a problem, there are people in need, and we should be focused on them. But it kind of reminds me of some of the mistakes with healthcare, and that of course our healthcare system pre-Obamacare had problems. There were some people who were not getting what they needed. But we took the healthcare system and rewrote it for every single American. As we saw, every single health insurance plan ended up being changed as a result of that. And I worry that as we go towards a national plan, that we're going to be moving towards this one-size-fits-all to help instead of focusing on helping a minority, we're going to rewrite the employment contract of 150 million working Americans, and that seems like what we should be trying to avoid, to allow the dynamic conversations, to allow the kind of person-to-person interactions that are kind of animate most businesses. But that's it for today, and I really appreciate everybody coming out for this issue and to talk to us. So thank you for joining us, and please come to the next IWF event. Thanks, guys.